Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, at least in terms of live comments. Getting a little bit of a late start. I apologize for that. We have, however, taken a lot of comments over the course of the last few days. We also have a massive show on deck for you here today. We are doing something that we rarely do on this program. We are watching for the potential of live breaking news to happen while the show is on the air. You know, Valdin Sone, the defensive lineman, is set to make his commitment announcement today. There is some internal dispute about what time this might go down, but we expect that maybe at some point in time during the show, perhaps at the end, although there is chatter at the beginning, we're just sort of on guard for whatever, that Sone will make his announcement today. We are watching that. There's also the Derek Cooper news on Sunday. We are, to be frank, watching that one a little bit less closely here at the moment, but we'll talk some Georgia recruiting on today's show. We also have, y'all, a tremendous guest today. Our guy Jeff Sentell continues his vacation. So in place of Jeff Sentell, how about this today? The great former Dog, the SEC network analyst, the Super Bowl champion, the just incredible man that is Benjamin Watson on today's show. Former Georgia tight end Ben Watson going to be here today. Man, I am thrilled about that. We did, to be honest, record this at SEC Media Days earlier this week. I'm telling you right now, it's fantastic. I got deep with Ben on some of the stuff related to Georgia's usage of tight ends. We talked about his former NFL coach, Bill Belichick, the weirdness at North Carolina. We sort of touched on an entire range of issues. All of it is really interesting and compelling. You're going to like that from Benjamin Watson today. That actually comes up here in just a couple of minutes. Also off the top of the program today, there was one question that Kirby Smart was asked at SEC Media Days this week that he didn't really want to answer very much. It involves a comparison between his two quarterbacks, but whether Smart wants to give lip service to this or not, there is plenty of chatter out there about that from others, and we're going to kind of dive deep into that. The sort of nature of the transition from Carson Beck to Gunner Stockton and kind of what is being said about that around the country here today. This is interesting. It's very candid. Some of it's a little raw, but I think it's important to do in light of Stockton's appearance at Media Days this week and obviously what comes next for Georgia at the quarterback position. So what do you say we start with that right now? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Back at the friendly confines of our studio today. Fun for us to get to do something we don't always get to do. We are watching for breaking news happening while we're on the air. I was joking with our video audience about this a moment ago. There is some dispute about when this might go down, but we are expecting a commitment announcement at some point in time from the defensive lineman, Valdin Sone. Excited about that, the possibility that Georgia could add another member, and this would be of the four-star variety, to its 2026 class. This after getting Nick Abrams earlier this week. All of this kind of I guess, a correction of the record after Georgia admittedly lost out on a couple of top recruits to Texas earlier. So it's a busy week for recruiting. Some of the news good, maybe more of that today, some of it not quite so good. We are doing our best to follow it all. And at some point in time, probably before we go off the air, we are expecting to hear one way or another about Sone, and we'll talk about that with you as it happens. Of course, the weird part about that is, and you've heard me say this 1,000 times over the course of the last decade, by the time most of you watch or listen to this show, this is something you already know about anyway. So only a very small portion of our audience, like less than 1%, watches live. So for most people, this will be, oh yeah, I already know about that BA. But for me, sitting here right now, and for those who are joining me to be a part of this live, which we're thankful that people do, this will be new to us here in a couple of minutes. So whenever it happens, we'll talk about it, and that will be interesting. We'll also have more UGA recruiting talk one way or another coming up in just a few minutes too. Let me, though, start with this SEC Media Days this week. And there is so much going on that in the moment, in the present tense, it is frankly at times a little bit difficult to keep up with for those of you who want to consume the content, for those of us who try to create the content, and for someone like me who wants to just sort of react to it all and just sort of, spew hot takes about every little thing that comes out. Even keeping up with what's being said is not always the easiest thing to do. There was a moment involving Kirby Smart that we really haven't had a chance to speak about until now, but in light of what others are saying, I think it's interesting what Kirby Smart chose not to talk about this week. He fielded a question about his transition at quarterback from Carson Beck, who had been his starter for 2 years, to what we believe will be Gunner Stockton, his starter this year. Personality-wise, these seem like very different players. I don't think you have to necessarily know them personally just to sort of get the aura of Beck, the aura of Stockton. Boy, it doesn't feel all that similar, does it? And so Kirby Smart was kind of asked that question of, hey, how'd you compare these two guys? And Smart simply did not want to do that earlier this week. It may have been the only question that he faced that he just flat out didn't want to answer. This is the exchange he had with a reporter on that topic earlier this week. Take a listen.
Between Carson and Gunner, what are some differences? What are some similarities in their personalities that you like about Gunner?
I don't do comparisons real well. I think you got to be careful when you do comparisons. I can talk to you about Gunner and the things I love about him. He's an extreme competitive kid. He's got great athleticism. He's improved his decision making. He's been part of going with the ones. You really grow as a quarterback when you get more reps against quality defense and quality offensive line to protect you.
So Kirby Smart, when asked flat out, hey, talk about Carson Beck compared to Gunner Stockton, he said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do comparisons, and instead went on to just talk about his quarterback, Gunner Stockton, which, if we're being honest, is sort of what Georgia fans are kind of ready for right now. Like, the one thing is, somebody who spends time around Georgia fans, as someone who is a Georgia fan, one of the things that is apparent to me and has been for a very long time is that for a lot of Georgia fans, once something is in the past, Georgia fans are ready for that to remain in the past. In other words, if I try to do a big thing on, like, say, Tyler Atkinson today, even though Atkinson just chose Texas over Georgia just a couple of days ago, there would be no shortage of comments from people who say, why are we still talking about this guy? He's chosen to go to Texas. Or if I were to discuss a game that Georgia lost a couple of years ago, or maybe even this past season, and kind of why that happened, a lot of Georgia fans might show up in the comment section to say, why are we rehashing this? This is old news by now. And by the way, Georgia fans, like anybody else in life, they have a right to feel the way they feel. They have a right to express the opinions they express. I'm just simply pointing out a common opinion that you do hear from a lot of Georgia fans of, once something is in the past, especially if it's an unpleasant aspect of the past, they don't necessarily want to kind of revisit that unless they absolutely have to. So with that in mind, I'm about to, for a second here, do something that's just a little bit dangerous. I do think the question that Kirby was asked is relevant whether Kirby wanted to answer the question or not. And even though it's a little bit dangerous to go back and kind of bring back a topic that Georgia fans are just sort of tired of and done with, anything related to Carson Beck, he's old news right now. He's the ex-quarterback. He's moved on. A lot of Georgia fans will be very clear. They don't want to talk about the guy that's no longer here. I do think it's important for me today to sort of let you know what is being said, because what's being said by others addressing the topic that Kirby Smart didn't want to address at SEC Media Days, I do think that gives us additional, and in this case, important context about the season we're about to experience in 2025. In other words, to sort of say this in a simpler way, I don't think we can talk about why Gunner Stockton is the Georgia starting quarterback and what the outlook for Gunner is on this team this season. I don't think this year's storyline can be properly understood without addressing what makes him different than Carson Beck, even though it's a tired topic. Not every Georgia fan wants to address it. And we're really careful about what we say about any player, even in this sort of modern NIL age where they're essentially professionals just like the coaches are. We're still a little careful about some of that kind of stuff, maybe because we're too old-fashioned, but we are as God made us when it comes to that sort of thing. So all of that is the preamble for this. Kirby says, I don't want to compare Gunner Stockton to Carson Beck, but do you know the NFL draft analyst, former ESPN employee, now doing his own thing via like YouTube and stuff like that, just like almost everybody else is, Todd McShay. McShay is one of the most prominent voices that exists in NFL draft talk. This is a respected guy. This is a guy close to the process. And he, on his show just a couple of days ago, this happened this week, was more than happy to make a comparison between Gunner Stockton and Carson Beck. Now, this is not the sort of thing that every Georgia fan is going to like. He's critical of Carson Beck. He's a little critical of Gunner Stockton. But sometimes our role on this show is to simply point out what's being said. We'll allow you to decide what it all means. We won't try to tell you how to think about this or interpret all of this for you. Some of this will be left for you to decide for yourself. But in light of the fact that Georgia could have still had Carson Beck as its quarterback, but instead has Gunner Stockton, the comparison between the two and the answer to exactly why that is, this is a subject that the respected draft analyst Todd McShay addressed earlier this week. Take a listen to this.
Why is Georgia like, we're good with him moving on? I just saw Gunner Stockton down at Manning Passing Academy, and I saw him last year at the end of the year. He does some really good things. He's athletic. He's competitive. He's a grinder. He fits exactly what the program wants. He ain't that good. He's not a world beater. He's not Arch Manning. This is not Arch coming back and he's ready to go, and Quinn, it's time to move on with the NFL or your grad transfer. This is not that deal. Gunner's good. He's not that good. Miami's got money. Ain't got that much money. You're telling me in Georgia's budget, if this guy was that good, and more importantly, if they trusted him and they loved the guy and they loved elevate the team, and it was about the team and about the guys in his huddle, the guys in the locker room. If it was about the right things, you're telling me the Dogs wouldn't have come up with the money and made sure that this was the number one priority, okay? So I'm asking you as our audience, if you're asking me the question, I'm going to throw a little bit back on your plate. And I'm going to ask you, what do your senses tell you?
So this isn't exactly new necessarily, but it's still, I think, pretty provocative when a respected guy, a guy who does this for a living, an NFL draft analyst, someone who's watching college film very closely, who was at the Manning Passing Academy last week, when someone like this says, hey, Georgia could have brought Carson Beck back, could have spent the money to do so, but there were things about Beck that Georgia didn't like, and so therefore they were happy to let him leave. This isn't a pro-Georgia voice saying this. This isn't an anti-Georgia voice saying this. This is just a guy. And the context for this, he was asked a question. It was like a mailbag episode of his podcast. He was asked the question of why he wasn't mentioning Carson Beck prominently in his NFL draft discussions as a high prospect to be an early round draft pick in the 2026 draft. And this is the sort of thing that he gets into there, which is Georgia could have brought him back, clearly chose not to. Therefore, in McShay's mind, he seems to suggest there may be something deficient about Beck and his leadership that makes him less attractive to NFL teams. This is not a part of the clip that I just played for you, but it was something that McShay also said. He went on to, without specifically saying what it was, allude to the fact that Beck was not at the Manning Passing Academy last week for something that I think can only be interpreted as some sort of character flaw, some sort of character issue. McShay was very critical of Beck for not being at the Manning Passing Academy. I don't know anything about that. I don't know what that's about. But if you watch the video from McShay, and I think you should, he clearly sort of alludes to, hey, it's a bad look on Beck that he wasn't there last week. Is that fair? Is that true? As I said before, I'll leave that for you to determine for yourself. It's not my purpose to interpret all that necessarily, but this is a prominent voice, a name you've heard of, and this is what he's saying about the Georgia quarterback situation, willing to go on the record about that. And we understand this larger context of what people perceive to be going on, the stuff that Smart is willing to say about his current quarterback, Gunner Stockton. All of this, I think, comes into a little bit of a clearer focus. If you take the words of McShay there a moment ago serious at all, I think you're led to believe, boy, there are real questions about Carson Beck's ability to lead. And frankly, at times, even the last couple of years, Kirby Smart spoke about the fact that Beck wasn't always the most vocal in that regard. But McShay pretty clearly takes it to another level in terms of questioning all of that. So when you hear the specific words that Kirby says about Gunner's willingness to lead, his ability to lead, the way in which that leadership quotient seems to be a good fit for his personality, I think all of that just kind of makes a little bit more sense. In fact, completely unrelated to Beck, but boy, very specific words being chosen about Gunner. All of this just seems more interesting in light of what someone like Todd McShay just said there. This is Kirby on Gunner's leadership from the main podium at SEC Media Days earlier this week.
Gunner is a kid that leads from the front. Gunner's a winner. He comes from an athletic family background. His dad played at Georgia Southern, and he is the kind of kid you want at the front of the line, and he leads from the front.
I'm always interested in what Kirby Smart says more than once within like the same couple of sentences, the notion that he's leading from the front. He says that twice. I think that does sort of feel like the version of Gunner Stockton that I know. And I do think that oftentimes what gets said at media days, whether it's by Kirby Smart or by other coaches, the points of emphasis for the upcoming year is a little bit in response or perhaps a retort or maybe a correction to the previous year. And I do think a Georgia fan would be within their rights to sort of read that into Kirby Smart's praise of Gunner Stockton right there. However, the other thing that McShay also said is, okay, so you don't like the Carson Beck leadership, so therefore you bring in Gunner Stockton. But how substantial is the skill set for Gunner Stockton? McShay says he saw him at the Manning Passing Academy. We talked to Gunner about the Manning Passing Academy this past week. McShay says he saw him there. And certainly when you listen to the clip we just played, McShay wasn't really wowed by the overall skill set of Gunner. So what many of you would say, and you would be right to point this out, I don't care how good of a leader you are. I don't care how much your teammates like you. Dalen Everett told us this week how much he and all his teammates do like Gunner Stockton, essentially confirming what we already knew to be true. I don't care how true all of that sort of touchy-feely, kind of intangible parts of all this are. You've still got to be able to deliver the football. You've still got to be able to play the quarterback position. You've still got to be able to get the job done when it comes to being between the white lines. And Todd McShay in the clip we just played, after having seen Gunner in person at the Manning Passing Academy, to be honest, and this is where we try to we're presenting you the information that's out there, McShay comes here and says, I was a little bit unwowed by what I saw from Gunner Stockton. So one more sort of point of additional context on that, and then we're going to move on and talk about something different. Another clip we didn't play for you in what we heard from McShay a moment ago was, in addition to being critical of Beck and his leadership, that's what you heard, he was also a little bit critical of Beck on the field last year too. The thing that McShay said in particular is that he made his receivers work too hard to go get the football a year ago. I'm not a scout. I don't pretend to be. I won't pretend to have noticed that on film when I've watched Georgia. But once again, if you watch the full clip of what McShay said about Beck, he was pretty clearly wording his kind of dissatisfaction with some of what we saw from Beck on the field. The overall stats would suggest that they're probably not as, kind of robust as you think they might be. In other words, we've said plenty of times that actually matching at the quarterback position, what Beck gave Georgia through 2 years may not be as hard for Gunner Stockton to do as some people perhaps think that it is. I think that's important to realize, and some of the words from McShay, I think, give voice to that. But there's also contrasting opinions out there on Stockton and maybe how good of a player he can be this season. McShay is a respected voice coming from this as a draft analyst, saying I was kind of unwowed by what I saw from Gunner Stockton. We would at least take that seriously given the fact that McShay's on TV and has been for years talking about this sort of thing. But it's also, from a fair and balanced perspective, important to point out other analysts who are saying something different. This also took place last week at SEC Media Days. Do you know the SEC Network analyst Jordan Rodgers? Rodgers is a part of their coverage. He is a former quarterback. And in one of the shows that he was on for the SEC Network, when it comes to describing what he has seen from Stockton in the moments that Stockton's actually played on the field, he pretty clearly, I think, drew a sharp contrast in terms of how sort of complimentary he was of Stockton compared to what McShay had said about him a moment ago. So for the full picture of what's going on for Georgia, the quarterback spot, let's hear Jordan Rodgers far more complimentary of Gunner Stockton. This is also from this week.
I just think people are really underestimating how talented Gunner Stockton actually is. Probably because he sat behind Carson Beck, who was one of the most gifted throwers in the country last year, even though he had his ups and downs. Like, he is a dual threat guy. He is a legitimate threat to run the football. And in that Sugar Bowl, I did the radio call for that Sugar Bowl. He played good enough to win that game. His offensive line couldn't block anybody. It was Swiss cheese up front. His receivers let him down over and over again. He continued under pressure to put the ball in tight windows. You saw the back shoulder throw there to Dylan Bell. He played good enough to win that football game. The rest of the team didn't against Notre Dame, who ended up playing in the national championship. I think a lot of people are overlooking just how good Gunner Stockton can be.
And, of course, the music there, as intrusive as it is, comes from the SEC Network and not certainly from us. But the clear point from Rodgers is, I thought that Stockton played well enough to win the Sugar Bowl. I don't know that the rest of his teammates did. In other words, what you saw from Gunner in New Orleans gave you things to like about him and not the other way around. And once again, we would take Jordan Rodgers' analysis on this pretty seriously. So let's sum all of this up this way. It is, to a degree, speculation, but speculation that's pretty well founded, that the reason that Gunner Stockton is the starting quarterback at Georgia now, more so than Carson Beck, is because the people around Georgia seem to like Gunner better. They do. Certainly the players that play with him seem to like him better. And if that's what the players feel like, the coaches oftentimes on a player-led team are going to take their cue from players. You would be speculating to say that, but speculation and just educated guessing is sort of a part of life. Our educated guess is almost everybody around Georgia just simply likes Gunner more so than Carson. That seems to be the case. And yet there is no free lunch in life. Just because you're a player that gives off better vibes doesn't mean you're automatically the better player. There is a responsibility to still go out and do it on the field. And it is just real and true. The opinions on how well Gunner is set up to do that, those opinions are a little bit mixed right now. That's just a fact. I do think that Rodgers brings in an important point, that Stockton's got more than just his throwing arm to give him a chance to succeed. Although he did make good throws in the Sugar Bowl, he's also got the opportunity to use his athleticism, to use his versatility with his legs. And we actually asked Gunner about that earlier this week. He says that's something he wants to do. It is an incredibly interesting picture starting to form around Gunner. What people like, what they feel like they know for sure, what they're not quite so sure about yet. And seeing how Gunner answers all of these questions once he begins as Georgia's starting quarterback here in 2025, that should be a fascinating process to watch play out. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We are presented today by Kroger, and we are happy that you're with us. Live on video, 10 a.m. Happy, by the way, to be back in our friendly confines of our studio again after being away for all of this week for SEC Media Days. We've got more from Media Days before we're done. Also some recruiting talk here coming up in a moment. But it's just kind of nice to be back at home doing the show again. Not my house, but although maybe one day. But from our home studio here after really a great setup for us at Media Days just down the road here, the College Football Hall of Fame. By the way, speaking of home, you can be at your home and get your groceries delivered right to you. Does that sound convenient? Does that sound fun? It's one of the features and benefits that could come your way as a Kroger Boost member. Boy, you'd love that. How about the chance to get those refrigerated trucks just showing up? All the great stuff that you want to buy there at your local Kroger shows up at your doorstep just the same way it would be right there in the store. Or if you'd prefer to get free grocery pickup, you can do that. You can go in store, in other words, they'll bring it right out there to you. That's super convenient. And as a Kroger Boost member, you can also earn twice the fuel points on the things you're already buying at your local Kroger. That's twice the savings. What a great thing that comes your way as a Kroger Boost member. So find out more today. It's Kroger.com/boost. To get your experience with Kroger Boost, to try it for free, Kroger.com/boost for more on that today. We think it's the best way to get the best of Kroger. It's a great membership opportunity, Kroger.com/boost for a lot more on that today. All right, we're glad to have you as a part of DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. A couple of, programming notes of sort to give you here today. Thing number one is this. Our Jeff Sintel is, and we're going to do some recruiting talk here in a second, but our Jeff Sintel, who normally joins us on Friday, Jeff is not with us today. His vacation continues. We'll look forward to catching up with Jeff again next week. By the way, I believe, if I have this correct, happy birthday in order to Jeff Sintel. I'm not always the best at keeping up with everybody's birthday, but I do believe that may be the case. So if that is true, we wish him happy birthday. And you know what? If it's not his birthday, it'll be his birthday someday, and we can consider ourselves having already wished it to him. But nonetheless, Jeff will be back with us next week. How about a great guest in place of him here today? And y'all, I'm telling you right now, you are going to love this. The former Georgia Bulldog, the current SEC network analyst, the Super Bowl champion, Benjamin Watson, with us here today. I had a chance to record this earlier this week at SEC Media Days. We get into some incredible hot topics, specifically when it comes to the transition to Gunner Stockton at quarterback, perhaps utilizing Benjamin's former position, the tight end spot, more effectively than Georgia did this past year. We'll talk about that. Criticism of the Georgia offense and Mike Bobo. Frankly, that ended up not being that big of a topic at SEC Media Days after it sort of dominated the discussion around Georgia, like, say, January, February. Kind of interesting how it just sort of went away to a certain extent. But we did address some of that with Watson. Watson, of course, knows Coach Bobo really well. He'll share some thoughts with us about that here today. He also really kind of gets into, his former coaches, Bill Belichick, obviously the all-time great in the NFL. But, boy, a pretty weird start to his tenure at North Carolina. Ben Watson had some really interesting things to say about that. We'll hear from him on that. All of that comes up in just a couple of moments. Also this, next week, I want you to be watching this space very closely because we are ready to make a really fun announcement about the 2025 season. I guess all the I's are getting dotted, the T's are getting crossed here. But a really fun event we're excited to bring back here in 2025. We're going to tell you more about that officially next week. So there's already been some chatter about this here and there. Perhaps many of you who are very close observers of the program, you may know what I'm talking about. But the official rollout, the official announcement, coming next week on the show. So stay very, very close to this particular space. We'll give that for you, a fun 2025 event that you're definitely going to want to be a part of. We'll tell you about that here coming up in just, the coming days next week. So stay tuned for that very, very closely. Now, before all of that, though, let's get ready to go around the doghouse here today, presented by our friends at Zagoria Law. We are watching here today for the, do I have a microphone issue? Oh, is that me? What's going on there? Okay, we are watching here today for big news to drop, perhaps while we're on the air, when it comes to the four-star defensive lineman Valdin Sone. Sone, his story coming from Europe, in Virginia, a target of note for Georgia, one that Georgia has been pursuing. His commitment set to take place today. We believe it may happen before we go off the air. And if it's not before we go off the air, it may be like right after the show is done. So for most of you, you will be well aware of this by the time you see the show, because like 99% of you consume it, on demand, whether it be video or podcast, you consume it on demand. But we're watching pretty closely for Sone to make his announcement today. We're also watching, at least to a degree, probably a little less intently for the running back Derek Cooper coming up on Sunday. Seems like that might go the way of Texas based on the online chatter. But if Georgia does add Sone to go along with Nick Abrams, which we obviously celebrated, this week too, that's a pretty strong correction of the record after obviously Tuesday did not quite go the way that Georgia wanted it to go. So Sone would be a great add. There are a lot of people who really like him a lot. There's also movement out there with another defensive lineman that we're keeping our eye on too. So Georgia loses out on James Johnson, but it certainly seems like it is nowhere near done, perhaps even as soon as today, when it comes to the defensive line overall. And as we've been saying, we're not going to sugarcoat the disappointment if you're a Georgia fan of a guy like James Johnson who had just committed to you, or a guy like Tyler Atkinson who had been on Georgia's radar for what feels like 5 years now. We're not going to sugarcoat all of that, but it is still, I think, important to keep the proper context in mind for this. For instance, let's make a comparison here for a moment. Think about Auburn. And I know that Auburn sort of feels like an easy team to kind of kick around. I do realize, and I don't want to necessarily make my hay going after soft targets. That just seems like a waste of your time. But still, Auburn is a fan base that would sort of like to aspire to have the success that its in-state rival Alabama, its longtime historic rival Georgia have had. Auburn thinks it could be doing those things too. But right now in the recruiting trail, as you know, they're not doing that at all. What are they? Outside the top 70, something along those lines? This has been a miserable recruiting experience for Auburn. Their fans are asking, why can't we get anybody from a commitment standpoint? Why can't we get anybody? It's worth noting that for Georgia, the question isn't why can't we get anybody? It's, if it's your team, why can't we get everybody? And that's context that's really, I think, worth understanding here, that while Georgia is not getting every player it wants, it is still clearly putting a plan in place to address its sort of plan A and then its plan B if that doesn't quite work out. And overall, we are still talking about a Georgia team that when the 2026 cycle concludes is going to be among the most talent-rich in college football, with a class that will certainly rank among the truly elite for this cycle, whether it's number 1, number 2, number 3. This is going to be about as good a signing class as anybody puts together. Let me show you some additional, sort of context for that too. And at a certain point next week, we'll probably talk more about this. It's one of my favorite pieces of yearly content that comes out. Bud Elliott from CBS Sports, 24/7 Sports, who does his blue chip ratio every year. We may not have this, but the blue chip ratio, where he looks at the teams that have over the previous 4 years a percentage greater than 50 of players on the roster who are former 4- and 5-star recruits. And what Elliott has kind of made famous, this is his prediction, that unless you have over the course of the previous 4 years a greater percentage of your players that are former 4- and 5-star recruits than otherwise, you simply can't win the national championship. This has been well founded with data. You should read this from Elliott. We'll do more of this on the show probably next week. But once again, to give you an idea of how good things still remain for Georgia, this obviously doesn't include the 2026 class because they haven't signed yet. But when you look at the current Georgia roster, Georgia has 84% of its roster that is former 4- and 5-star recruits signed over the previous 4 years. That puts Georgia third best in college football behind both Alabama and Ohio State, which have a whopping 89. But once again, the difference between 89%, 84%, not all that, great necessarily. Georgia has 84% of its roster as former 4- and 5-star recruits. So what that tells you is that if the prerequisite for winning a national championship, and Bud Elliott would say that it is, if the prerequisite is having more former blue chip recruits than not, then Georgia passes that test with flying colors. It's got 84%. Now, that doesn't necessarily make you less disappointed about losing Tyler Atkinson or seeing James Johnson flip. Doesn't necessarily make you any less disappointed about that. As a fan, you have a right to feel whatever way you want in terms of those particular pieces of information. But when it comes to the overall talent level of Georgia, for now, they've clearly got enough talent to remain in the national championship conversation, perhaps at the thick and the top of the list of teams that could win the national championship. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. And we'll be watching today to see if Georgia, before it's all said and done, can add another 4-star defensive lineman. We'll also make that around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. I'm so happy to have Zagoria Law a part of what we do here on our program, because I love the fact that they help people with sort of a specific area of the law. And law is complicated. You watch the stuff related to college football all the time. All the attorneys who are involved and all the opinions that are being expressed, you kind of come away with, boy, legal stuff is just really complicated. So to have the most legal expertise, a great strategy for that is focusing on a very narrow aspect of the law. And within the personal injury space, that's what our friends at Zagoria Law have done. They're focusing on one kind of personal injury situation, folks who've been bitten or injured by a dog. The owner of that dog, perhaps negligent, thinking about parks, your neighborhood, all kinds of public spaces where dogs get free. Oftentimes a bad decision by an owner is what allowed that to happen. And then before you know it, someone's been knocked down, they've broken their arm, they've been bitten. That creates all kinds of medical bills, pain and suffering, and all of that sort of thing. This is the kind of thing that Zagoria Law is dedicated to. In fact, they're really the only law firm in Georgia who is specifically dedicated to these types of personal injury situations. They love helping Georgia fans who've been impacted by this. In fact, they literally wrote the book, and I mean literally wrote a book, on how to win these sorts of cases. And that knowledge, they want to put that to work for you. So give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's 833-GA-DOG-BITE, dog spelled conventionally, D-O-G, or online, ZagoriaLaw.com, Z-A-G-O-R-I-A, ZagoriaLaw.com for more on that today. You'll love our friends at Zagoria Law. You've been injured by a dog, bitten by a dog, someone you love has the same situation. Our friends at Zagoria Law standing by to help you here today. All right, so before we're done, we're going to recap some of the best moments for Georgia at SEC Media Days. We'll also look at some of the things you may have missed from the big event this week. And if Valdin Sone makes his announcement, we'll also take a moment to celebrate that here too. All of that good news, but for now, as promised, an interview that I think you're going to really like. Sharp analysis here from a guy we really respect, Benjamin Watson, Super Bowl champ, SEC Network analyst, but as far as we're concerned, former dog, the top line on his resume. Let's talk to Benjamin Watson here right now, today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. And here on DawgNation, happy to bring in from the SEC Network, and of course, as we know him, the great former Georgia Bulldog, Benjamin Watson, here today. Thanks so much for your time, and hope you're enjoying SEC Media Days.
I'm enjoying it. It's good to sit down with you and talk some football.
Yeah, what's interesting to me about this event, especially these days, is it's almost like you've got like two pillars of conversation going. On the one hand, people are as excited about the games as ever, and we're certainly in that category. And there's also this other thing that goes on, and you see this as like Commissioner Greg Sankey walks around and some of the other media types with sort of the confusion about what the next phase of the sport's going to look like. Yeah. It's interesting to watch, I would say, both of those conversations happening at the same time.
Well, you talk about the business of football.
Yeah.
One of the things you learn as a player and even going through the NFL is that there's football, yes, there's the X's and O's, but then there's also the business of football, and college football is no different. When you talk about the different conferences and whether we're going to go to 8 or 9 games in the SEC, or what the playoff expansion is going to look like in a couple of years in 2026 and 27, those seem like higher echelon conversations, but they impact everybody. And so there's a vested interest in knowing that. But the excitement, I think, for the fans, they just want to make sure that there's still football.
That's right.
And they want to know how their team is going to do, and they want to have exciting, compelling football games. And as I look back over the last season, we've had a lot of those games. All the business side of it, the expansion, I think has been a good thing for college football, not a detriment.
What did you make of Georgia's appearance here on Tuesday? I thought the most interesting part of that was obviously the introduction, kind of to the rest of the league, of Gunner Stockton, the guy that we believe is going to be the Georgia starting quarterback. It seemed like that went really well. Gunner's pretty mild-mannered, but he certainly has no shortage of confidence, and it seems like Kirby's got plenty of confidence in him. What did you make of the Georgia appearance overall?
Well, I thought it was rather understated.
Yeah.
This is the defending SEC champions. And I'm not expecting a ticker tape parade or bells and whistles or anything, but Georgia's not being talked about in that way. I would also say I think Alabama's going to be really, really good this year too. They're not being talked about. And so the questions, we had Kirby on set and we asked him some questions just about the offseason, about Gunner, about just this idea of, being overhyped versus underhyped. I think Georgia is in a unique position where they've had so much sustained success that anything outside of lights out, blowing people out, people look at them like, are they taking a step back? So it'll be interesting to see with Gunner. I like what I see from him. I like the intangibles that he has. I even like, the way he speaks, the way his teammates speak about him. So excited to see how he develops as a quarterback, specifically over that first part of the season for this offense.
So I totally agree with you. It seems like, and we joke about this all the time, Georgia beat Texas twice a year ago, and it seems like Georgia's still sort of fighting to get the credit they deserve for that. But on the other hand, we talk to Georgia fans every day, and if you want to go back to the early part of the calendar year, back in the winter when the loss to Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl was still fresh on people's mind, boy, there was a lot of criticism of what they felt like was offensive regression. A guy that you know well, Mike Bobo, the offensive coordinator, was kind of in the spotlight on some of that. Really, there wasn't that much of that I think has come up this week, but when you want to go back to a time a couple of months ago when that was a really hot discussion, Paul Feinbaum kind of led the way on some of that. How much of that criticism of Coach Bobo and whatever Georgia was or wasn't offensively, how much of that do you think was fair?
Well, I think there's enough criticism to go around. I think a lot of it is fair because that's how we operate. When things don't go right offensively, when there's inconsistency, even when there's dropped passes, Coach Bobo isn't out there trying to catch passes. He's not the one dropping passes, but it all comes back on the coaching staff because it's where's the disconnect? What are you not teaching well? What are we not doing in practice to improve these sorts of things? So when you see the same problems over and over again, then many times it falls back on the coaching staff. Look, somebody brought up a good point earlier about offensive coordinators that coach for defensive coaches and how many times they are, and I'm not saying this is the case, but as I look at this situation, including my experience playing in the NFL and playing for some defensive coaches versus offensive coaches, a lot of times the offenses that play under defensive coaches are minimized. They're constrained in a bit. And so I do think, look, there's a lot to go around. I think some of that was Carson Beck last year. Look, let's be honest. When it comes to the Sugar Bowl, we're going out there, Georgia's going out there with a quarterback that hadn't really played. He hadn't game planned before. So there was a lot to be desired there. I think we know moving forward what it's going to be. And I also think that, look, if the head coach has confidence in him, it doesn't mean that nobody can critique. But it means that he must see something in Coach Bobo that he wants to win. He wants to win, too.
I want to ask you about one of your other former coaches here in a moment. Before that, a year ago, you look at Georgia, once again, very deep at the tight end position and the aftermath of the Brock Bowers era. But it seemed like it kind of took a while for Carson Beck and Oscar Delp, who was kind of one of the more experienced tight ends a year ago, to sort of get on the same page. And we sort of saw Delp be way more part of the offense kind of like mid-November on than we did through the first 2.5 months of the season. I guess how real is that sometimes for whatever reason, quarterback last year is Carson Beck and a guy like Oscar Delp, who we think is a really important weapon for Georgia this year, that sometimes you're just not on the same page. How real is that?
Sometimes you're not on the same page, but also sometimes people don't understand how good some players are. And I said this over and over again, specifically for Georgia fans, like Brock Bowers was a generational talent. People sometimes had a nerve to say, how is he going to do in the NFL? I don't think he's going to translate. I'm like, are you serious? Have you watched this dude? What do you mean, how is he going to translate? I said, he's probably going to be one of the best to ever play in the NFL, and that's what he's turning out to be. I said the same thing about Ladd McConkey, watching them play. And so sometimes we don't appreciate what we have, and we don't appreciate the greatness of certain players because they make it look easy. And then when the next players behind them don't do the same thing, we immediately think there's something wrong with them or something wrong with the coach and those sorts of things. And so, look, Oscar Delp, I think he's made tremendous strides. From a physical standpoint, watching him block, he gained more weight. He got stronger over the last couple of years. When he first came in, he didn't have the girth or the strength to play on the line of scrimmage. He's at that point now. But he's not Brock Bowers. But he has to know that he doesn't have to be. And also what happens with offense is sometimes when you have great players, and this is where offensive coordinators, whether it's Bobo or others, have to be careful. they have to be careful when they have great players at certain positions. They rely on those players' individual ability to make plays and forget that they need to be sure to design plays and scheme plays for other players and not just rely on that player. Because when those players leave, you can't just simply rely on that position because that player's not there. That's when you know you're a great offensive coordinator, when you realize where your talent's gone in that position, but you can then maneuver and strategically place other players in positions to be successful.
I think that's a fascinating answer. All right, let me finish with this.
Yeah.
Obviously, you won a Super Bowl with Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots, very important part of that franchise. And now Belichick is in college. Now, all-time great NFL coach, he may be truly the GOAT. But is it a good fit in college football for Belichick at this stage of his career?
I don't know, bro. I'm going to be honest with you. I'll be honest. I was surprised. I was really surprised. And I know Bill, but I don't know Bill. I do know that there's an allegiance or an affinity for North Carolina. He has history there. This is perhaps a legacy play for himself, for his sons that are coaching with him. There's all these other things. I was surprised that he decided to go to college to come coach. And I'm even more surprised at all the other things surrounding him with his personal relationships with female, with his girlfriend, and how that's playing out. It seems he is doing all the things he told us not to do. That's what's confusing me about the whole situation. But I'll tell you this, he knows how to win. He knows how to create a structure that is professional, that has high accountability. And if you want to be successful, success doesn't just happen because of talent. It happens because of a process. Coach Belichick knows how to establish a process and hold himself and others to it.
We're big fans of yours, Benjamin Watson. For people who want more of you, either on the SEC Network, author, speaking, everything else, how can they find more of you?
Find me on Twitter/X, Benjamin S. Watson. Same thing on Instagram, Facebook. I'm on all those sorts of things. We have a website called thewatson7.com. You can find us there. And I'll actually be releasing a podcast myself pretty soon.
Congratulations. That's
awesome. In about a month in September. It's called The Just Life.
Okay.
It's based on Micah 6:8, about doing justice, loving kindness. And in my podcast, I'm interviewing in person people who are engaged with different justice issues, trying to teach all of us how to treat people more fairly and equitably across a bunch of different issues, whether it's abuse or whether it's religious persecution or race in America, faith, all those sorts of things. So The Just Life is kind of my pet project that'll be coming out in September.
Sounds incredible. And, of course, this fall on the SEC Network. We can't wait for the season to be here. Benjamin Watson, we appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Boy, what a tremendous thrill that was.
Thank you, Greg, for that warm.
What a tremendous thrill. What a tremendous thrill that was. Get a chance to hear from the former Georgia Bulldog, Benjamin Watson. SEC Network analyst doing a great job there and all kinds of stuff with his own books, new podcast. Just a really, really just a compelling, provocative voice. Really incredible stuff. And frankly, to hear him be as candid as he was, kind of away from the topic of Georgia, but his former NFL coach, Bill Belichick, to get that kind of candor for him, really fun too. I just really enjoyed that discussion with Bill Belichick. I should say with Benjamin Watson, I mean to say. Very interesting stuff indeed. Now, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And it is an exciting time to be a part of everything happening with Royal Caribbean. Of course, we know the debut of Star of the Seas is now just a few days away, and I'm jealous. We were joking about this in that, I was certainly looking forward to my chance to be on Star of the Seas here in August as it gets ready to set sail from Port Canaveral for the first time. I'll miss that, won't get to do that, but certainly I'll be looking forward to being on Star of the Seas as soon as I possibly can. And for all of you who are getting ready to have your time on Star of the Seas, you'll have to tell me all about it, as so many of you do when you go on your Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. You're always sharing that with me, and I'm thrilled that you do. So Star of the Seas has kind of set sail for Port Canaveral. It's finished its construction there in Europe, and it's sort of made its way. It's in Port Canaveral. It's ready to start greeting guests here very soon. That means you can book it here right now. Our good friend Jessica Slater standing by to tell you all about the newest in the Icon class of ships. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, Jay Slater, dreamvacations.com. It's going to be an incredible experience. You can be a part of it. Star of the Seas set to set sail from August. Boy, that's going to be a lot of fun. All right, so let's do this as we're cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean here today. Let's recap a couple of the other things in kind of no particular order from SEC Media Days. And by the way, we're also watching, perhaps before we go off the air today, to hear news on the four-star defensive lineman Valdin Sone, perhaps committing to Georgia, or certainly committing somewhere. Georgia hoping to be the winner of that battle. If that comes down while we're still going, we'll talk about that with you. We're keeping our eye degree on Anthony Lonan out there, too, another defensive lineman that Georgia's in the mix for. So we're watching all kinds of recruiting stuff here pretty closely. But as far as the SEC Media Day stuff goes, I think it's pretty clear that the one big narrative that got pushed a lot before the week came to an end is what's being described as a burgeoning rivalry between Georgia and Texas. You know, this is one of those things, we get plenty of predictions wrong. This is one we got right, though. We said this going into last season. With the potential for Georgia and Texas to play multiple times in the same year, the two programs that had been strangers could leave last season as rivals. I don't quite think we're there yet, but pretty clearly there is more being said about this battle between Georgia and Texas. Texas got a chance to celebrate a couple of recruiting wins this week. That seemed intentionally orchestrated to get the most attention for that, and frankly, you can't fault them for trying to do that. Sometimes your nemesis, your opponent, just sort of gets over on you. In the case of Texas, to their credit, they did that earlier this week. I do think, though, what we heard from Benjamin Watson is 100% true. The fact that we don't seem to see Georgia getting enough credit for along the way to last year's SEC championship, beating Texas twice. I think a Georgia fan is well within his rights to have a chip on his shoulder about that. It sounds like Watson does. We think that's fair. Another issue that came up a lot at SEC Media Days this past week is what the House settlement, the court case that's supposed to provide some structure for the future of NIL, what it does not seem able to do. The Texas recruiting wins seem to be an example of this, that this sheet of paper that the House settlement is written on is literally just a sheet of paper, or more likely a PDF. But either way, it has no actual power. It's not going to shake free from a manila folder and stop anybody from doing anything. Judge Claudia Wilkin can render her opinion, but she has apparently no enforcement arm associated with her court to see that her opinion is then enforced. And right now, it certainly appears like that within the world of college football, the NIL restrictions that were supposed to be kind of the aftermath of the House settlement, they are literally speaking just not worth the paper that they're printed on, which brings in the United States government. We have seen some real movement in the direction of legislation coming from Congress. Some people don't believe that's ever going to work. Some people don't think it should work. We'll leave our opinions on that kind of aside for right now. It's just factually true, though, that this legislation thus far has kind of gotten farther down the road than almost any legislation has on this sort of thing in a very long time. You also heard some words from the president earlier this week about what he'd like to do in the way of executive order, kind of basically issuing a challenge to all parties involved to come up with some sort of national standards for NIL. Now, listen, politics is by its nature partisan, so therefore when a partisan political figure gets involved on either side of the aisle, it creates the opportunity for others to be against it just because one side's for it. Frankly, you see some of the national media coverage kind of demonstrating that. Even right now, there are major outlets who aren't even talking about this, which I think is kind of fascinating because of the sort of partisan nature of it all. The only thing we'll tell you is the same thing we've always been telling you, that we do think there is a pathway for stability for college athletics related to roster certainty, related to the transfer portal. In other words, the biggest complaint we've heard from coaches is, boy, from week to week, you don't really know who's going to be on your team. We think that the power of government can kind of bring some of that to heel. Anything related to like compensation is always going to be a little bit of a tricky thing to regulate. It's always going to be a tricky thing to govern. And frankly, it may be a virtually impossible thing to restrict. But we do think there's more of an appetite for a return to some stability right now in college athletics, perhaps more so than there's ever been. And if that's the mood of the public, pretty clearly the politicians are going to notice. And frankly, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. If you're someone who wants to be a part of the solution for how to make college athletics a little saner, well, I'm all in favor of anybody getting involved who might be able to do that. Let me mention a couple of other things sort of football related here for a moment too. We told you yesterday there was the chance that the biggest story of SEC Media Days could play out related to the rumors involving first-round draft pick of the Cincinnati Bengals, Shamar Stewart, formerly of Texas A&M. Mike Elko yesterday did make it clear that Stewart is not returning to college, that he apparently had been working out at Texas A&M and in College Station, but there is no plan to return to college, if perhaps for no other reason. And some of y'all know like NFL, CBA stuff better than I do. In fact, almost all of you probably do. But I think there is some belief, different than, say, I think what happens like the Major League Baseball draft. I believe the Bengals, after having drafted Stewart, would retain his draft rights no matter what. So the idea, well, I'll just go back to college and use that as leverage. The Bengals, I think, would be able to come back and say, well, go back to college if you want to. If you can get the court to rule in your favor, we still would have your draft rights even after that. So it certainly seems like while the Stewart camp is holding out in Cincinnati, they are not all that intent on using the threat of fighting the system and going back to college as some sort of leverage to get the contract they want from the Bengals. So that did come out yesterday. And I'll also mention one more guy in kind of a complimentary positive light in a way that you're probably a little bit surprised to hear. Do you know who I thought was one of the kind of going back and sort of looking back on some of the stuff that happened at Media Days that I didn't necessarily pay as much attention to while it was happening? Do you know who I thought was one of the sort of the low-key winners of Media Days? In a roundabout way, I thought it was Brian Kelly from LSU. And I don't say that very much. You know, Kelly kind of comes across a little bit of a phony to me sometimes. I don't know that he has the most authentic feeling personality, whether that's just, you know, a misperception or not. I think that's the vibe he sort of gives off. But let me tell you one thing I really liked about Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly made it very clear how important it is in his mind for LSU to win week one playing Clemson. Because the biggest knock on LSU, and probably the thing that sort of kept LSU out of some of the conversations with the college football playoff and things like that, is they lost, I would say, embarrassingly to USC a year ago. That was not the sort of USC team that ought to be beating LSU, especially given the backstory of, you know, Lincoln Riley and what people believe was kind of running from the LSU job because, as we've said, maybe he didn't want to be in the, in the SEC. To let him get that win over you was not good. And losing 2 years prior to that to Florida State certainly was not good either. And so for Kelly to come out and say, we've got Clemson week one, and we're putting that Clemson tiger paw all over our, workout, facility, weight room, things like that, that kind of seems a little bit corny to some people. But to me, it's a really good example of Kelly saying, we're just simply owning what we need to do. We need to win week one. Everybody here knows that. Fans know that. We're just simply openly acknowledging the truth of that statement. And for as much as sometimes Kelly I just find reason to fault him and reason to criticize him, boy, in that particular case, I just think that's a pretty good job of saying exactly why something that everybody knows is important is truly important to him too. So rare praise for me of Brian Kelly, but in that particular case, I think it's nice to see him taking a subject head on like that, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And here on DawgNation Daily, we'll also get ready for our long drink, long finish. It's how we've closed out the show here on Friday for a very long time. You heard me say this a moment ago, that when it comes to everything going on with SEC Media Days, hard to keep up with it all. How about the very best moments involving the Georgia Bulldogs from this past week? Well, our Cody Chapins did a really good job of following the Dogs around and putting it all together in a nice little montage here. If you want to hear some really good and at times even funny stuff from Kirby Smart, and as well from C.J. Allen, Dalen Everett, and Gunner Stockton, we'll give that to you right now as a part of a long drink, long finish to close out our week here on DawgNation Daily.
Thank you, Greg, for that warm welcome.
Now we have C.J. Allen up here. Would anybody like to start with questions?
We're going to be really young, especially on the offensive and defensive lines, but 54% of our players are coming into their first or second year. So what do you get with that? You get youthful exuberance.
We've had a great off season, just getting to know everybody and coming together and really connecting.
Gunner's just a great competitor. He wants to win. He comes in with his head down and work. This is something about him.
The number one thing Gunner does is he leads. He does it the right way each and every day. He commands the room.
I've been hanging out with him over the summer and stuff. I've seen him try to make that effort to step up and speak up more. So he's definitely growing as a leader, and we're definitely proud of him for doing that.
I get more attention, in Athens, getting pictures and stuff like that. But I think that comes with the role, and probably just being more vocal with the team and just enjoying it. I've enjoyed the process so far, and I can't wait for the season. I'm really excited.
We sell relationships over transactions. We think the relationship still wins out because the relationship allows you to push people and demand excellence.
We don't fight, we have a target. We approach every opponent the same way, no matter who we're playing. So no matter if we're lined up versus the 9U Bulldogs, we're going to approach it the same way.
So you want me to pump up Jordan Hare? Is that what you want me to do?
If we're doing anything cutting edge, I'm not sharing it today. I can assure you of that. Yeah, I called him and offered him Muschamp's job, but he was overqualified, so he wasn't interested. No, I heard all the scuttlebutt and everything about it. I almost laughed. It was like somebody needed something interesting to talk about yesterday. So,
just this offseason, always working on something and trying to get better at it. And I can always get better at the little things. And for me, it's been a bunch of footwork stuff.
I've always been trying to work on doing a better job, tracking the ball in the air. That's something I feel like, even if you are good at it, that's something you can always work on.
Fire, passion, and energy. There's fire, passion, and energy. Play with fire, passion, and energy.
Fire, passion, and energy.
Passion, energy guy. We talk about that a lot.
It's guys that have fire, passion, and energy.
Playing with their fire, passion, and energy.
I've seen what it looks like to have fire, passion, and energy. A love for the game and fire, passion, and energy.
Coach Smart used to play DB, so he really has different expectations, I would say. But at first, I really didn't know how I would handle it. Just it would kind of overwhelm me when I was freshman, back when I was a freshman and stuff. But I feel like over time, really just understanding you got to hear the message he's saying and not the tone, and just really just understanding what he wants from me and just hearing that and not really taking it as personal and just keep trying to improve. So
this is a pretty good life. I'm earning $200K a year. I'm very comfortable. And you don't reach your goals being comfortable. You don't attain great success. None of those people I mentioned before were ever comfortable.
I think any chance you get to go out there and put your helmet on and play football, especially for Georgia, it means a lot. So all those games are important to me.
We found it's not how fast you run the 40 or how talented you are. It's how fast you run the 40th 40. And how passionate you are in the third and fourth quarter when you're tired. And sometimes those guys have more intrinsic value for your team than maybe a guy who is a scholarship player but is disinterested because he's not playing.
Trying to learn the game more, learn the game, understand instead of just what I have to do, what everyone else has to do, just because I feel like that will just help the position more, or even help the defense more, because you really have a better understanding of who's doing what and where your help is and stuff. I would definitely say that part of the game.
Thank you, and go Dogs.
So really good stuff from Kirby Smart, Dalen Everett, C.J. Allen, Gunner Stockton last week at SEC Media Days. Really good job by our Cody Chaffins kind of putting all that together as part of our long drink, long finish. By the way, I'll also encourage you to do this. If you'll check out this week's edition of DawgNation at Large, they did a really funny bit related to, we've now got 10 years worth of Kirby Smart doing SEC Media Days. So there are some commonalities that you notice. And they had a great bit kind of predicting some of the stuff they thought that Kirby Smart would say, some of the narratives that he would try to push. Some of them they got right, maybe some of them not quite on the nose quite so much. But it was really funny and worth your time to go back and revisit Connor Riley, Kaylee Manziel with Cody Chaffins as a part of DawgNation at Large this week. It's on the DawgNation YouTube page. You can see it there. You should also, by the way, become a DawgNation YouTube subscriber. You'll be glad you did, on all of the stuff as it relates to UGA and our coverage of Georgia. Become a DawgNation YouTube subscriber for more on that. And also, as you're getting ready to enjoy your weekend, how about enjoying some Finnish long drink for all of that? It's hot. It's summertime. That means pool. That means golf course. That means everybody's sort of outside, but you want to stay cool and refreshed while you are outside. So a great tasting beverage, I would say, is a good way to do that. A cooler full of the Finnish long drink seems like a good idea to me, whether it's the pineapple, the peach-flavored version here in the Peach State, Long drink, 0, no carbs, no sugar. The cranberry, still my wife's favorite. The traditional citrus, that's my favorite. Blue can, grapefruit flavored gin kick. For what it's worth, that's also Kaylee Manziel's favorite too. She'll every now and then send me a pic of her enjoying some Finnish long drink, which I'm always glad to receive. Always a tremendous thing. And long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. And I know some of y'all like that. Either way, it's a great part of your summer. We love the Finnish long drink. So please make sure you have them online. Or I should say, make sure you find them online, thelongdrink.com, and you can figure out where to pick some up. I promise you, it's somewhere close to you because over the course of the many years it's been with us, we've seen it really grow here in the state of Georgia. A lot of golf courses tell me it's like the most popular selling beverage they have because it's a ready-to-drink cocktail that you don't have to mix yourself. You can literally just pop the top, drink it out of the can, pour it over ice, whatever you like to do. The Finnish long drink is ready for you. Glad to have the Finnish long drink as a part of what we do here on DawgNation Daily. Also, before we get ready to go, let's give you a quick shout out to our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau as well. We love Georgia Farm Bureau's connection to our state. We say it all the time. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. That means for your home insurance, your auto insurance, the kind of financial services stuff like life insurance and things that kind of exist in that category. All of that is yours as a part of Georgia Farm Bureau. So give them a call, 877-404-1050, 877-404-1050. When you pick up the phone, you call, the person on the other side going to be a friendly voice for you right here in the great state of Georgia. You can also find them online, gfbinsurance.com. That is gfbinsurance.com. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. And as we fire up the fight song today, before we officially give you our golden chew, let's celebrate some good news. I believe it has just dropped right here as we go off the air. Perfect timing. Valdin Sone, the 4-star defensive lineman, has committed to Georgia. So this is where the smart money was on this. There you go. How about that? Valdin Sone, a part of the UGA. You love that picture, by the way, the Georgia championship belt. That's a awesome thing to be able to see. So Georgia adds 2 really nice commitments this week. The person of Nick Abrams earlier this week, Sone here today. Really good news, and we think there is more on the way for this 2026 class with Georgia there too. So perfect timing for us. Right as we go off the air, this just becoming official. Valdin Sone committing to the University of Georgia. Great news. Let me also give a golden shoe here to Missouri coach Eli Drinkwitz. I don't have the video clips to play for you. He was really funny, though, during his SEC Media Days press conference. You know, people kind of pay attention to certain aspects more so than others. But the stuff that he said about, playing the wrong fight song and the fact there were very few people in the room with him as he started, kind of acknowledging in some cases topics that not every coach would want to address head on. We think that Drinkwitz got a pretty good personality, and frankly, we need a little bit more of that sometimes around the SEC. So we're starting to kind of like Drinkwitz here a bit, and we'll give him a golden shoe for what I would say being the single most entertaining personality at Media Days here this week. Lousy, stinking Gators. How about our Gator Hater Updater? 1,714 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised. The price is promised. You can trust them on that. So good news for Georgia. The young man from Sweden, now by way of Virginia, commits to UGA, defensive lineman that a lot of people really like, and he is in the fold here at UGA, and you are very, very happy about that. So celebrate that with us, and we'll take some of your comments on pretty much anything you want to discuss. By the way, Jaywalk shouting out to another pass rusher that Georgia got by way of Europe. Do you remember Richard Tarditz going back to the 80s from Biarritz, France? They called him the Biarritz Blitz. I remember that very well. Those were formative years for me as a Georgia fan, for sure. Faraday Pippin, by the way, our good friend Faraday, who does so much great work for us here at DawgNation, enjoying Benjamin Watson a little earlier. Faraday, I appreciate that. Y'all would love Faraday. She's great. Some of you know her, but she's great. Brian Jordan says, you're going to get a monster C in Athens. Is that what Sone said? Because if he did, that's a cool line. If that's what he said, that's a very cool line. What else? By the way, Jaywalk also kind of pointing out the preponderance of fire, passion, and energy statements and references from Kirby Smart. There were certainly a lot of those. No doubt plenty of that for sure. So D. Nelly's bringing this up. And honestly, I saw this, but I just didn't have time to get in the show. And frankly, I don't understand this. So ESPN, let me see if I can even find this. So how did ESPN not have Kirby Smart as the top coach? I guess that's the question. And is this true? Did ESPN not really have it? ESPN's website's also a mess. Just an absolute mess. Because they're the one that did this. Okay, yeah. Ranking the best coaches over the last 20 years. Is that what this is? No, that's not it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's like ESPN's got a stranglehold on college football, but they seem to want to use their website for very little of it. Maybe they're just out of the website business, I guess. But I saw this thing, but I can't find it on the ESPN site. But what's funny is if I go to On3's site, I bet you it's going to be right here at the top. Yep, right here it is. So I can go to the On3 site and get the ESPN story better than I can get the story on ESPN's own site. So do that what you will. So it's somehow performance related to expectation. And Kirby Smart comes in at number 3. Yeah, I don't understand that. I don't. And look, the name of the game for any of these rankings, you've got to be to a degree somewhat contrarian. Otherwise, what's the point of clicking? So that's just the name of the game, and that's just how life goes. But I'm having I can't give you an opinion on this right now. I did see it, but I didn't put it in the show just simply because I had enough stuff for today's show, and I didn't really understand it. So I don't understand that. I don't understand that. Maybe somebody can help explain to me what their argument is. Whether you agree with it or not, maybe you can help explain to me what their argument is. But it's also pretty funny that you can't find their story on their site, but I knew good and well On3 would have the ESPN story on the front page of its site, and sure enough, it did. Also, ESPN doesn't have the Trump story at all, which I think is kind of interesting. I mean, I guess the point is like things that ESPN used to be into, they're not into it all anymore. They've given up on radio. They've given up on websites, which is funny because these other mediums still exist. I mean, people still use websites. More people than you realize still listen to the radio. And somehow ESPN's just sort of given up on that. It's really weird. ESPN's very strange. Dana Turk says, best phrase from Kirby, we are relational rather than transactional. I do really like that. I do really like that. Let's see what else. SEM Dog says Texas can't give money to a lot of money to every player. I know that's true. I heard Sark say it. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the most talked about things from media days was the very, I would say, unbelievable statement that, I don't mean unbelievable like, wow, can you believe he said that? I mean, in the literal sense, truly unbelievable. Sark's thing about, we only have so much money to go around and blah, blah, blah. I mean, the one thing that always fascinates me is those that we know are winning because of prodigious NIL, how little they seem to want to brag about that. I find that to be really fascinating. And listen, I'm also not going to lie to you. I mean, Texas has a lot to sell other than money. That's clearly true. Sark is a good coach, I believe. Texas has a good bit of continuity with its coordinators. That's a pretty big deal. Numerous years with both the same guys working as offensive and defensive coordinator. It's a program where you can be well taken care of in many ways beyond just money. So there's a lot going on here beyond just the NIL stuff. But we know that Texas is outspending most programs when it comes to NIL stuff. It's interesting that nobody who does that wants to brag about doing it, even though it's clearly legal and sort of the name of the game here right now. UJ Marine says Texas got 4 billionaire boosters and is it 3,400 millionaires as alums? Well, at the rate inflation's going, we're all going to be millionaires soon enough. Although I guess inflation's down now, so maybe that's not the truth anymore. Let's see what else. West GA Dog Fan says, Sone says we're going to dominate in the trenches. Boy, I love that. Bill Camacho also celebrating. He says Sone is a done deal. A little bit of an eye rhyme from Bill Camacho. Randy Hall also celebrating that too. Senior Dog 54 says he's watching Shark Week with the sound turned down. Is Shark Week still a thing? Because I do love Shark Week. He says Hammerheads are a lock for the offensive line. I'm going with the Bull Shark at nose tackle and the Tiger Sharks at linebacker. Can't decide what to do with the Great White. I'll tell you this. A lot of times the Shark stuff ends up being overhyped because it does well with news coverage. It seems like Sharks are really back. I know in Florida, Sharks have been a big issue this summer. Big issue. Sometimes this is overhyped. But I think in this particular case, it's probably real. SEM Dog sarcastically says, I wonder what the main message that Kirby Smart wanted to get across was. Yeah. Kirby doesn't leave you much room for interpretation on that, does he? DT says props to the Raiders. They didn't need a tight end, but Brock was too good to pass up. Others had the opportunity and passed, and they are kicking themselves. Jalen Carter was similar. Each fell below their value and are the number one player at their position in the NFL draft. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. In short order, as you say, that has happened. And, I do think what Benjamin Watson pointed out, something we all have taken our time to consider, that Brock Bowers truly is an all-time great. Truly an all-time great. I think that's absolutely true. Let me go back to YouTube. We'll get some Facebook comments here, too. John Weather says Matthew McConaughey is paying for them recruits for Texas. Somebody's paying something pretty clearly. And when it comes to, we've all, or at least a lot of us have had our version of issues related to college athletics, and people say, well, somebody's got to do something about this. I'm just trying to be as objective as I'm capable of being. I'm a big believer that there are a lot of issues that somebody needs to do something about. I do believe that. I'm not afraid to say it. But when it comes to so-and-so spending bigger than you want to steal a recruit from you, I really don't know how much you're going to do about that. I really don't. I think you can fix the transfer portal. I think you can bring some roster stability. I think you can protect college athletics as an amateur academic-based endeavor. I think you can do some things to protect college athletics as we've known it. I really think it's a pipe dream that you're ever going to fix. Well, if somebody's desperate enough to spend twice what you're willing to spend, they may get the player that you want. I don't believe you're ever going to really do much to fix that. I really don't. As I've told you all before, I think eventually some market forces might kind of fix that a bit. If you spend big and it doesn't work, you may be a little hesitant to spend obnoxiously in the future. That just sometimes happens. But I just think it's important to separate what I want as a fan from what I want as someone who tries to be a stakeholder within the sport, as sort of pretentious as that sounds. In other words, I want good stuff for Georgia football because I'm a Georgia fan. But because I view college athletics as important for American society, which once again also sounds pretty pretentious, because I view college athletics as important for American society, I want to protect the role that college athletics has played in the lives of the people who care about it. And that's the stuff that I think you're sort of on firm ground to say somebody's going to do something about this. But I don't know that I need Congress to step in just because my favorite team lost out on a recruit. But if people are trying to radically interpret certain aspects of labor law in a way that transforms the very nature of what college athletics has been, then I do think the government ought to step in on that. I do. And without getting too deep into this, there are a lot more things. I mean, that's a lot more of a worthy endeavor because of the impact it has on our everyday life than some of the other things that government spends its time working on. So, I get why people are skeptical that government involvement could work. I do understand that. But I don't join anyone's opinion that this isn't a worthy endeavor for Congress or a president, no matter what party he's in. If it makes the lives of, hundreds of millions of Americans better, then what, and by the way, college athletics does, then that's a lot better than a lot of the stuff they could be doing. For sure, in my mind. Chef Jay Bowen's playing the new Donkey Kong game. Is there a new Donkey Kong game? I love classic video games. I've never been a big video game player. I don't really play the EA Sports games very much. Although they were kind enough to send me the game last year, and I was thrilled about that. My son plays it literally all the time. But I don't play very much. He probably likes MLB The Show the best of all, but he plays EA Sports second most. Even when I was a teenager, like when everybody's playing GoldenEye and stuff like that, I've just never been, or NBA Jam a few years prior to that, I've never been that big of a gamer. I've just never been that big of a gamer. But I love 80s era classic arcade games. Love Donkey Kong, love Galaga. I love 80s era video games. But other than that, I've never been a big video game guy.
The new one is called Donkey Kong Bonanza. Just was released on Nintendo Switch 2.
Donkey Kong Bonanza. That sounds fun. That sounds really fun. Yeah. I like the Nintendo universe. I do. I like Donkey Kong. I like Mario. I mean, everybody has some experience playing Super Mario Brothers, so I do have some of that. I used to love Super Mario 3, for instance. Probably my favorite of the Super Mario universe. Everybody had some experience with that. And I definitely liked Super Mario 3. I mean, all the Super Marios for a while. 3 was my favorite. But yeah, that's really fun. So I'm very much in favor of that. The new Epic Universe at Universal Studios in Orlando. That's not an ad. I'm just into theme parks and whatnot. They've got the Super Nintendo Land, which seems like it'd be really fun.
You and the kids ever mess around with a Wii?
We do have a Wii, but we've never really. I mean, my daughter liked the Let's Dance game on there, so we played that some. I guess we never did a lot of where you use the controller to like swing a bat or something like that. We never did much of that. I don't really know why. But we never did a ton of that. But we did have one. I'm trying to remember what we would have played, but like where you like bowl or you swing a bat. We didn't do a ton of that. We did not. But I do know people that did like it. Oh yeah, by the way, I meant to mention this a moment ago. George on Tap shouted it out. So our buddy Brian Harmon, not really our buddy, but we certainly root for him. Already a claret jug in his trophy case, seeking another one here at Royal Portrush this weekend. Harris English has also played well there too. So the British Open is underway, and a couple of dogs making a pretty big move here, including Harmon, I guess, back to the top. As many of you know, Harmon, beloved by us, not always beloved by everybody else because it's pretty slow pace of play for Mr. Harmon. But we're certainly happy to see a dog on tour doing well there at the British Open here thus far. And Royal Portrush is a fun, I think a fun part of the British Open Rota. Tripp would like to see Kirby recruit the Mobile area a little bit better. Yeah, a lot of good talent comes out of there for sure. Did I ever go to Facebook? I guess I didn't. I apologize, Facebook friends. All right, let me get over there to you, and we'll take some comments there. On Facebook, I meant to do this earlier, and I just got busy talking. Gary Holt says we're getting closer to some football, and boy, Gary, I'm excited about that. Philip Jordan Wells, Jacob O'Neal talking about what they call AI slop. Yeah, I mean, in some cases, to me, AI is still pretty easily identifiable as AI. Even AI text looks like AI text. But it's obviously getting, in some cases, better. But there are also, I think, some examples of, as AI uses more AI, because AI is a large language model, as more and more of the language of the internet is actually AI, one of the reasons why you see some AI produce incorrect stuff, like in some cases, it's making up a novel or, citing incorrect facts. Sometimes you'll see that. Part of that's because it's almost like the feedback loop of AI using other AI to formulate its messaging. So in some respects, AI is getting worse. Now, I'll tell you, I am pretty worried about AI overall. I would say that I'm always suspicious of technology. I really am. Super suspicious of technology. And so this is no different for me on that than anything else. But as someone who has sort of worst case scenarios in my mind related to AI, in the near term, it sort of feels like for me, AI is on a little bit of a losing streak. Does that seem fair to say? That some of the stuff, the slop, as you call it, some of the slop seems less believable than it was even, a few months ago? As someone who spends a lot of time online, seems like I'm seeing that.
Well, you're a state licensed BAAI to continue doing the podcast?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, listen, here is what I think, and we talked about this before. So I think everybody should consider, could AI replace me? Could AI do my job better than I do? Here is what I sort of hope, is that I'm just weird enough, like my imperfections come shining through, right? It's like, if I was like the more, handsome anchorman, or if I had like perfect diction with my voice, if I was, in command of every single fact, that to me is the sort of thing that AI is likely to replace. Like AI is coming for the white collar jobs more so than the blue collar job. It sort of seems like to me anyway. Early read would suggest that's true. But I'm sort of just weird enough, sort of just imperfect enough, and more than happy to kind of make my blemishes on display for everybody to see. Like I'm just sort of imperfect enough that I'd like to think that, I hope that makes me a little less difficult to copy. But that's really what the future is going to be. It's like, you better be unique enough that you're not easily replicated, because if you can be replicated, you probably will be. Jonathan Aaron asks a good question. He says, top 5 dream list of people who you would love to interview. Who would that be for you? That's a really good question. I don't think Kirby Smart would be in my top 5. I don't think. We've had a chance to talk to Kirby a little bit. But I don't think Kirby would necessarily be in my top 5, although I certainly wouldn't mind it. I think I'm trying to come up with good answers here. I think my people would be related to those who've seen a lot and could describe it really well. I mean, I also have a list of people completely away from Georgia football that I'd love to talk to. I would love to talk to. We're talking about golf a minute ago. For instance, like Jim Nantz is someone who I'd just love to sit down and talk to. Never met him. I've been in close proximity to him a few times before, but never really met him. I would love to just speak to him and talk about, the things that he's seen, the life that he's lived. And what I believe is, and I know that some people think Nant's a little bit corny, and I guess, as I've said on shows even this week, some of y'all think I'm corny too, so maybe we fit in well together. But his appreciation for what he does remains as high as it ever was. And I really like that. He would be on my list. There are other people that are very much on my list that I will not probably reveal because they're just sort of personal to me. But to try to give you something in kind of the universe of what we do here, the Georgia football stuff, that's interesting. I will tell you this. we do have an interview coming up that you're going to see in the next couple of weeks with someone who has been very close to the inner workings of the early days of Kirby Smart as a coach, the success at Alabama that produced that. This is a really fun interview we're going to do very soon. And we'll have that for you here very soon. Who else would be my top 5? That's a good one, John. Let me think about that some more, Jonathan. That's a good one. Let me go back on Facebook some more here. They're talking about Rice in here. Jacob O'Neill, by the way, says, I don't play games. I quit school because they had recess, which is a very funny line. It's a very funny line. Marshall Fleming says, there's a very famous alcohol brand, Spirit, that is known to be a very big Texas donor. He says that 10% of their profits go to the Texas football program. I've certainly heard that before. Josh Hobbs says, is Georgia going to beat Alabama this year? If you had to bet your entire bank account on it, is it a win or a loss for the Dogs? Well, I'm certainly not betting my bank account on anything. But if forced to make an opinion, I'm certainly not going to pick against Georgia. I'm not. But I will tell you that as we get closer to the season, while I'm pretty high on Georgia overall, I do view Alabama as a really dangerous opponent for Georgia. And the Texas game is going to get more attention. But I believe that for Georgia, Alabama is every bit as dangerous as Texas is. So the point is, I'm going to take Georgia's because it's sort of fun to say out loud. But I do view Alabama for Georgia to be an incredibly dangerous opponent this year. And if we would say, and I think sometimes we have, that Georgia's sort of overlooked, perhaps a little undervalued, I do think Alabama fits into that discussion too. Johnny Prescott says if you could go back in time interviewing someone like Louis Grizzard. And I think that may be where I end up sort of being, is wishing for like the sort of time machine, or just sort of maybe one day the magic of AI will make this at least conceivable in a reasonable facsimile style way. To interview someone like Louis Grizzard, who was obviously famous as a writer and a big Georgia fan for many, many years, a good while ago. Boy, what an interesting interview that would be. I think, to go back to Jonathan's question, that because we have been, fortunate enough to talk to a lot of the people around college football now, and there's not a lot of mystique left with a lot of them, but to interview some of these figures from the past, boy, I'd really like the chance to do that. I really would. Jacob O'Neill says BA can't lose that cruise money. No, listen, I'm not going to risk I'm not going to risk anything that might keep me from setting sail anytime soon, for sure. Philip Jordan Wells says algorithm BA ain't going to be fun. No, listen, we're going to do everything we can to keep that from being a thing. My newest sort of like technology concern is, and this is not, I don't know enough you shouldn't take this seriously. I'm a little concerned about these driverless cars, and not for the reason that people think. People think, the driverless car is going to have a wreck. I sort of see this as a little bit different. Like my question about that is, and I think the same thing about the navigation devices. I think the ability to control traffic, control the flow of traffic, sending it one way, diverting it from somewhere else, that seems like a really powerful thing. And I seem to be the only one who thinks that. But the ability to control the flow of traffic, whether it be through navigation, which you obviously have human control of. In other words, a human can look at the directions and say, I'm simply not doing that. And for my navigation app, there are plenty of times it wants me to do some convoluted thing like, a human being knows this is a stupid idea. I'm not going to do this. But the more we have driverless cars, the more we're going to be, at the mercy of where the driverless car takes us. And I just think the power to control traffic is a pretty powerful thing. And nobody else seems to be thinking about that. But boy, I think about that a lot. Where you go, where you don't go. I mean, it's no different than the flow of web traffic. I mean, we've seen how powerful that's made certain companies. Imagine being able to control the flow of actual human traffic to and away from certain places. How interesting could that be? I wonder. Clayton Davis checking in here on Facebook to celebrate the commitment from Valdin Sone. Yeah, we're excited about that. Certainly happy to have him here. Oh, we actually have a bite from sound for you to hear. This is Valdin Sone a little earlier on his Georgia commitment. This is courtesy of Rivals. Is that right, Jay? All right, courtesy of Rivals, the newly marketed, branded Rivals recruiting service. Valdin Sone on choosing Georgia.
The development and the coaching throughout the years that Coach Kirby Smart has shown and Coach Scott, I mean, I feel like that's a great fit for me and great fit for the PPI package. I mean, we come to work and we come to grind. Go PPI.
So there you go. Shouting out, I guess, what his marketing agency there, but a lot of nice things to say about Georgia. That Valdin Sone from a little earlier. Once again, Rivals with Rivals making that announcement here today. And by the way, Justin Ham says as a trucker, he 100% agrees with what I said a moment ago. Thank you, Justin. Appreciate that. Listen, I'm telling you right now, we have a lot of people who listen to our show who drive for a living. I'm telling you right now, those are my people forever. You got to understand something. You know, all the stuff that just sort of shows up at your doorstep, that doesn't happen without truckers. And so my truckers are my people. And so, Justin, I'm glad to have you here today. Appreciate that. By the way, Ralph Price also mentions, let's get AI to do yard work. So I'm going to tell you this. I think this must be true. I believe someone in my neighborhood has, what's the vacuum cleaner thing that you have inside your house that kind of just sort of moves around on its own? What's that called? It's famous. My brain's just not working.
Roomba.
The Roomba. I believe that somebody in my neighborhood must have some sort of like lawnmower that works like a Roomba, because I like to walk and I'll be walking and I'll just see this thing constant. I mean, I see it all the time. It's just constantly going up and down the yard, all around the yard. It's just, and it looks like, it must be just trimming the grass, right? That's what it looks like to me. So in some respects, we do sort of live in the future. It's like if people really do have robots cutting their grass, then we basically live in the future. And I think that must be what this is. Yeah, Paul Moon says, I was talking about the Roomba lawnmower with my wife yesterday. It took me way longer to mow the lawn than I wanted it to. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what this is. And I think they just sort of have it constantly going. I mean, it's just, up and down and up and down. I mean, it's just always doing its thing. I mean, unless it's something I don't realize, but I believe that's what it is. Paul Moon also brings up an interesting point, and this is really getting out of bounds here a little bit, but I do think it's interesting that, like so much of our technology is related to two things: communication and information. And we have such an explosion of like communication and information related technology that like other kinds of technology, we just don't really have any kind of breakthroughs in them at all. For instance, related to transportation. I mean, like sort of hardware technology, construction related technology, things that are not, software ones and zeros. It's just really interesting. We've almost now conflated, we hear the word technology and we think information communication. But I mean, there are a lot of things that would sort of exist in the world of technology, as sort of life has progressed. Technology has meant industrial revolution, things like that. There are a lot of things in the technology space that have nothing to do with what we sort of solely think as technology here today. But that's also a very, very different topic for a very, very different day. Wildman Slayer, to bring it back to football, says, there's more to a player than the stars. Jordan Davis was a 3-star. Kirby knows a football player when he sees one. This is true. This is true. That, and I've said this before, that the true secret sauce that makes Georgia, Georgia, I think there's a degree of that which is scouting related, seeing what others don't see, more so than it's ever been given credit for. For instance, the world, when Jordan Davis was coming out of high school, sort of thought he was an offensive lineman. Georgia saw him as what is probably a little bit of a higher value defensive lineman, athletic enough to play on the defensive line despite the fact that he was so big. Georgia clearly got that right because not only was he a defensive lineman, he's one of the best in program history. An incredible job of scouting. But, as I sometimes say, the truth, the total truth, is never 100% of what you want it to be. And it is fair to point out that while the Jordan Davis example is something real that did happen at Georgia, it is also, I think, in some respects, the exception that proves the rule, that I still think that defensive line is a position more so maybe even than others where who are the best defensive linemen? Oftentimes the usual suspects. Oftentimes it's the exact guys you thought it would be. So what is your plan for having elite defensive linemen in a day and age in which elite defensive linemen are a really expensive proposition? It's the sort of question that Georgia's going to have to wrestle with in future years. It really is. And clearly they're providing some answer for that today by getting Valdin Sone. But if you put that aside and just look at like James Johnson earlier this week, when those might say, well, it's okay that Georgia lost out to Texas for James Johnson in a bidding war. We'll just go out and find the next Jordan Davis. Finding those diamonds in the rough, the defensive line position, is not an easy proposition. That sort of big hit, it's just going to happen sort of few and far between. It's sort of the exception that perhaps proves the rule. All right. We are going to go on Facebook one more time. Ken Holcomb says a few companies have robotic lawnmowers now in the right yard. They are great. Yeah, I'm guessing it probably works better on a flat yard than a slope yard, or if you have the kind of, in some cases, truly, sort of oddly shaped yard. My guess is that's not great. Philip Jordan Wells reminding us that the robots in the Matrix started out as construction bots. Yeah, I don't know what to make of, they always show these videos on social media. I really don't know if this is, but, the robots now are just running, and there's these robot dogs. Is that real? Half the stuff you see, sometimes you wonder if this is real, but these robot companies put out these videos. It's well, if this is real, then it sort of feels like it's already over, doesn't it? Because I ain't outrunning a robot. I'm telling you right now. I'd like to think I might be able to at least hold my own, being more believably human than some sort of AI presentation of me. But if it comes to, can you outrun a robot? There ain't no way I'm doing that. So I never know if those videos are real, but boy, if they are, we're in trouble. It seems like that, as Philip Jordan Wells points out. Bill Sanders says that's where the development comes in for the various players. He says nobody in the country does a better job than Kirby Smart on that. That's true. And boy, it's nice to know that so many recruits still seem to recognize that and truly seem to value that. That seems to be the case. All right. So Alan Hampton writes in to say, my wife, Vicky, a huge dog fan, is watching for the first time. Well, awesome. He says, how about a Dog Nation shout out for her retirement after 45 years as a nurse? Vicky, what a great heritage that is. What a great story that is. Congratulations on your well-earned retirement, and it is a privilege to have you here watching our show today. And now that you've got some more time on your hand, we hope this is not the only time that happens. But either way, Vicky, we're very happy for your retirement. And you make Alan do something nice for you. Make him take you out to a nice restaurant, nice trip somewhere, nice little party to celebrate you. Something, because you deserve it, Vicky. Congratulations on all that. That is awesome. DB says in a few years we're going to be living just like the Jetsons. yeah, I want. I mean, like the last thing is the flying cars, right? And we do have like hovercrafts and stuff like that. But I mean, the flying cars is what I want. Because when I was a kid, the Jetsons were on, and then Back to the Future 2 had the flying cars. I want the flying cars. I do want that. In fact, I told you I'm pretty like suspicious of technology, more so than I should be. They give us flying cars, I'll be early adopter on that. I'll be first in line. I mean, I won't be able to afford it probably, but theoretically anyway, they make the flying cars. I'll be the first one for that. Jill Burke, interesting comparison, comparing Gunner Stockton and Nick Chubb, somebody who was completely satisfied to do all of his talking on the field. That's an interesting comparison. I really like that. That's really good. All right, one more time here at DawgNation.com, then we have to go. Randy Hall says, yeah, there are some like fast food places you go to now, especially in like really big cities, I think, where like the whole thing is essentially a humanless experience, the whole thing. I have seen some of that for sure. Garrison Tucker, by the way, says there are excavators now that don't have a human operator. He says remotely controlled. He says transportation is trying, but we just have to work with the government. Yeah, interesting. It's pretty wild stuff, man. A wild world. And I don't know that anybody quite knows where it's all going to go, but it is certainly fascinating. And, it seems like, big change is on the horizon here. So we'll see. Hey, y'all check out RS Andrews online. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust all of that to them, including it's really hot. You know that. How about getting your AC tuned back up to factory fresh specs? Our friends at RS Andrews can do that for you very well. You can find them online, rsandrews.com. They'll get new life into your old unit. They'll keep you cool and comfortable all summer long. So find them online, rsandrews.com. Have a great day. We'll see you back here to Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.